Hello, this is Nick Rijmakers from Adobe. I am here right now to help you get started with the HTTP cache module from Adobe Consulting Services IAM Commons. So here in this video, I would just like to really go over the basics, excuse me, how to get started. And you get started with the HTTP cache here by defining a configuration, OCI configuration file. But first, I would just like to go over what exactly we need to cache in our hypothetical example, because that's important. Otherwise, I cannot really explain this to you. So just for demonstration purposes, I created a very simple example. So what I've created is an example component that basically will load in a resource, and the path to load in is configured by the author. So that's just configured, and then it will load in basically an expensive component, which I hypothetically just named, to simulate, the inclusion of a component that takes very long to render and burns up a lot of resources. To that, I add the selector content, and why I will explain now. By standard, I will not display anything and not do anything and not do any heavy rendering. But if the content selector is loaded, I will call my Sling model expensive component and get the image URL. And what do we have here in the model? We have a thread sleep of 5 seconds, just to simulate some heavy lifting going on here. In real life, this could be, for instance, the header that's quite heavy with all the traversing, or maybe traversing a lot of nodes to build up some sort of component. That could be a lot of things, but here I'm just simulating it very simply with this thread sleep. The image is just the image from the Fast Action Manager here, the thumbnail. So again, by standard rendition, it should not display anything, and I'm just going to show you on the IAM instance here. All right, here it is. Don't display anything in its standard form when viewing it by the author. And then on the page where it is actually referenced or loaded into, here we have the example component, loads it in, and the image is displayed. But also we have a delay of 5 seconds. So here I will demonstrate the delay for you by just reloading the page. As you can see, it takes quite long, 5 seconds. And on this page, we should not get any delay again, because we're just loading in, this text without any thread sleep. Okay, so here you go. So this could be in real life a real example where, for instance, you cannot use the dispatcher, or you are using server-side include, or maybe you have a very short time to live on the dispatcher with lots of pages, and the initial hit load is important for SEO purposes or just for user experience. And then you definitely do not want this delay of 5 seconds. So in this case, because this image is always the same, and that's important, it should always be the same for every page loading it in, because otherwise you will get stale content. But because in this case we always return the same image, we can go cache it with HTTP cache and make it a lot faster. So that is what I will do here in this video. So basically, how do we get started? I should go to the documentation. So how do we get started? Well, first we start by creating a Sling OSGI config file. So let's get started with that. So I'm just going to copy this here. This is the config folder of the project. And I'm going to, instead of using unique name, I'm going to use expensive comp.xml as factory. This is a factory, so we do need to use our unique name here at the end. And one thing to note is, because we're hardly doing any coding here, or actually none, and it's all XML based, there's no compiler, so any mistakes in your XML file or any misconfiguration will be more difficult to debug than just Java code. But yes, if you get the hang of it, you will be able to develop this or leverage this really fast. So I'm just going to start by copying the example over. All right, so I'm just going to go over there. The documentation does mention this, I should say, but I'm just going to go over it. The order. So the lower the order, the higher it will be checked. And the first one that accepts the request will actually create an entry. And if none are hit, then of course nothing happens. I'm just going to leave this at 1000, it doesn't really matter. So request URI patterns, that is actually the actual request URI in the browser. So in this case, that would be this. So it's not the resource path, that's important to note, but it's the request URI. So don't get that confused. So in my case, I'm going to, well, make it simple, and I'm just going to say, star.html, or even, I could even be more aggressive, just select everything, because I don't want to filter on here in this case, but you could. Blacklisted obviously does what it says, but we don't need that, so I'm going to remove it. This is actual IAM authentication, which is built in. In our case, I'm just going to say both. I want to not differentiate on this. Invalidation oak paths, this is for cache invalidation, which we will address later in a later video. So I will for now just ignore this and not make stuff too complicated. Expiry on create, I'm also going to ignore. We're just going to stick to the basics. Then first we'll address actually this one, the custom rules. Again, here you could override some basic rules such as don't cache if the response code is 500, but in our case we keep it simple, we just ignore this. Okay, I need to replace these ampersands. All right, so now we come to the important part, because obviously if we would do this here, then we would just cache everything, and that's not gonna be very nice. So these are the two most important properties, I think, or I believe. However, also the most complicated. So with these two properties, you configure a cache config extension and a cache key factory. Usually it's the same target, but it does not need to be. So first we need to choose which kind of extension we will use. In our case, it will be the resource type extension, because we want to cache only a resource with a specific resource type. So if I'm not mistaken, let's see, and I go to the documentation, and we have our config extensions here, the out-of-the-box ones. here it is, the resource type HTTP cache config extension. This is, in my opinion, the most, well, basic and most versatile extension, and this will be the most used. We use the group HTTP cache as an example, but this one will be the most used in my opinion. So to create or to leverage this, I copied this file name, or well, package, and I will paste it. And again, it's a factory. So again, I need to say, all right, does it expensive comp.xml. You can name it anything you like here, but I just like to keep it consistent. All right, add to Git. Okay, then I'm just going to copy over this file because I'm lazy and remove these props here. All right, so we have our OSGI config for the resource type HTTP cache config extension. All right, then we also need to change the targets here in our base config file. So I will do that now. Oh, that's a slight mistake. Oh, okay. There we go. I remove the expensive comp from here because we target the factory PID. Okay. All right, and since this is a factory, and since more than one factory instances can live inside the OSGI container, we need to, well, make this unique. Actually, this got renamed in a later release, so we're gonna have to adjust them. You're gonna have to check the docs which we're using now. Currently, ACS Commons is going through some, well, reverting or changing back with the new OSGI annotation, so check which one to use. But in my case, currently it's config name. All right, so this will be a unique key that we just make up, and again, just to keep it consistent, I'm going to name it expensive comp. And this is then what will target or hook in the OSGI config that we just defined. So I also need to put it in here. Obviously, I need to say, okay, here, quotations. All right. So now we basically hook this in. So what I'm going to do is deploy this. I'm just going to use IntelliVault. Okay, so it imported. And I'm just going to check basically if the components are running inside the instance, inside the container, because this is pretty important. If the target is not set correctly, it won't be running. So this is the first thing we want to do. So I'm just going to go to components. And again, I might also make a mistake here because, you know, just one tiny mistake in here and yeah, it won't run. But once it runs, it stays running. All right, let's take a look. Okay, so our resource type HTTP cache config extension is satisfied, but it's not activated. So apparently I must do something wrong. And I see here unsatisfied reference. I'm guessing this is where I made a mistake. So I'm just going to take a look. Is it this one? No. Okay, well, let me take a look. Okay, this is the one. But for some reason this is not valid, and I need to figure out why. Okay, service back to PID. This looks proper. Yeah, expensive comp. Well, I can actually go to the component itself and check which reference, of course, is not satisfied. So I'll just do that right now. So this is where it really gets tricky, as you might notice. There's one active, so which one was that? Oh, that's the header page I have configured. Okay. All right. So here is one unsatisfied. Which one is unsatisfied? Okay, so the config extension seems to be satisfied, but the cache key factory not. That's funny because this one is actually seems to be binded, but the other not. So I have to, apparently I made a mistake here. Okay, it seems to be. Okay, yeah, there you can see again, or this typical, make a slight mistake and it doesn't run. Well, here is where you have to look. So remove that. I'm gonna deploy this again. Okay. So I really want to make sure these are just running before I proceed, because this, yeah, you don't want to be dealing with this later. Okay, so now it's active. All right. There is one thing that we also need to configure is the request scope, because we are caching a include and not a request. And as you might have seen already, the configuration here points to request and not include. So again, for people not too familiar with Sling, the request scope is really if you directly access a resource in your browser, say, or through Postman or whatever, then request will be your option. The request filter chain will be executed. But if you include a resource, and that's in our case the case, obviously, because here we are including with data SLI resource, the include filter chain will be executed. So it needs to be include. And I don't want to do this in here, obviously, because then next time we deploy, it's gone. So I'm going to adjust it in the OCI config. And this is done in the base configuration. So make it include. I'm going to push again. And if I take a look now, hopefully this will be correct. Header page. Yeah, okay. It is adjusted. It's now include. Okay, I'm just going to go over the settings briefly to see if I forget anything. We'll go over the more advanced stuff later, but it seems to be configured properly. All right. So now we need to add some criteria to our resource type HTTP cache config extension, because again, we didn't do anything here yet, and we need to tell the extension what to filter or to differentiate on. So by default, HTTP cache doesn't know much, but you need to instruct it. So we will instruct it here. So just by going to the extension, okay, so I'm just going to get the properties from here. Again, these might change in the new release, so do check this. If it changed and you don't, and you apply this right here, it won't work. All right, so first of all, allowed paths, that's the resource path. I'm just going to actually use this. This is an regex array. And I'm just going to say, well, it has to be under content my layout. Oh, excuse me. I'm just going to go to CRX. And I'm going to go to the, let's see, where it actually will be executed. It's over here, I believe. And I'm just going to use this as a base to create my regex. So I would say for me, anything under here. This will make sure that anything outside of here won't be cached, just in case. This is pretty powerful with Sling filters, and you don't want to do damage. So you really want to narrow this down to only specifically cache what you want to cache. Because otherwise there might be, well, some surprises which are not too pleasant. So I won't want to cache any resource that has a path under here. So I'm going to say greedy, well, selector here. Okay, but now still we're gonna cache everything under here, and that is not good as well. So now we need to narrow down on resource type. So I'm just going to do that right here. Let's see, copy resource types, property key, and it's again an array. And I'm going to go to actually in the repository and take a look. My expensive component is located right here. So this is the resource type as it is configured here. This is where it will match on. I'll just copy that and paste it in here. Okay. So I think I should have done everything. So yeah, we can only find out by actually trying it out. So let's deploy this to the Auth instance. I seem to make this mistake all the time. Scrolling to the left, silly. All right. I'm just used to working on a big screen as well. Okay, so let's give it a try. All right, so first time it should still take 5 seconds because it actually needs to capture the response. But second time it also seems to not take very long, so obviously something is wrong, I think. So I made a mistake here. I'm just going to check in the JMX interface. So if we go to main here, to JMX, and then we go to, well, we search for HTTP cache, and we get the in-memory store. This is where it should land by default, unless we tell it otherwise, which we didn't. So it should come in here, and it doesn't. So something is wrong. So I need to figure out what that is. So to figure that out, I'm first just gonna go in the configuration manager and check our configs again. Okay, not this one, obviously. Okay, well, let's take a look. Okay, request UI pattern seems to be valid. Authentication both, yes. Include, yes. Okay, resource type. Maybe I done something wrong here with allowed paths. I'm just gonna try to remove this, and then it shouldn't check on this, just to see if if this is the problem or not. No. And it was the problem because now, as you can see, there's a cache entry. So now it should load pretty fast, which it does. So this is a nice way to just isolate the problem. Obviously now I have to solve it. I probably made a mistake in this regex expression. So let's check it out what I should do. Alright, so let's take a look. What did I do wrong here? Oh, yeah. Silly. It's not my layout, it's okay, layout WCM. So yeah, that's a pretty silly mistake. But yeah. You'll be doing this a little bit to set things up, but it still beats, writing your own filter and all your own Java classes to capture everything for every single optimization. And after a while, it gets a lot easier. So, okay, I save this, and now it should also work. Basically, I hope. It doesn't seem to work. Or does it? Ah, it does. Okay. So now we basically cache this include resource. And you can see already 6 hits. You can also get the contents. You can inspect them by basically executing this JMX command. You copy the cache key over here and you invoke it, and there you go. In our case, just a simple image. So just as an interlude to the next problem, or the next problem that we need to solve, as discussed, by default, by just loading the component itself, not including it, it should have this text, don't display anything, and not be slowed down. Now, what we now will see is it won't be slowed down, but the image will be loaded in. And the reason is that currently, as of this release with HCSAMM Commons, and I plan to actually improve this, is that we cannot also add the sling selector to the resource path check mechanism. So what we should want to have basically in here is say, well, we want to say extension here, and then selectors allowed, and then basically say, okay, we only want to cache and create entries and hit the cache if the resource is loaded in with a selector content, because now it doesn't care whether it's with selector content, so this one, or this one. It doesn't care. It will just cache it whenever it's included. So this won't work in our case. So what we're gonna have to do is to actually create our own custom cache config extension and our own custom cache key factory, and then reference it in this base file basically. And we also then have to tell our customly created factory and extension which selectors to differentiate on using the Sling OSGI config. But that will come in another video. Bye for now.